Report.
Welcome to the show, and it is jam-packed. Double standards as Labor panics about its Muslim vote. Anthony Albanese today lashes out at Israel's Prime Minister over the death of an Australian aid worker and won't rule out a war crimes investigation. But one of America's top generals says Israel is being held to much higher standards. Yes, indeed. Where are the calls for war crimes investigations into Hamas? What's going on? Also tonight, why does the New South Wales Premier have as a judge of his literary awards an academic who has praised an Islamic terrorist who killed these Jewish children? The madness now. Queensland locals tear into the new Premier as yet another global warming scheme blows his budget by $6 billion so far and counting. But also good news, my tips of the week, one of the best books ever by a journalist that most people have never heard of. How true his words are now. And of course, my whiskey of the week, the cheapest yet. But how good can cheap be? But first, what a stunning day in the federal court. And just stunning. And I was left with this thought. If what this man said in court today is true, and was put repeatedly to him in cross-examination that it was not, then the Brittany Higgins case is going to destroy a few more careers yet. And all this about a rape that we still don't even know actually happened. Extraordinary. How many people have already been damaged since Higgins accused fellow Liberal staffer Bruce Lehrmann of raping her in Parliament House? In the Defence Minister's office, no less. A claim Lehrmann strongly denies and it's never been proved. Lehrmann's damaged goods, even if he's innocent. Higgins has fled to France. The Defence Minister's name smeared, ex-Defence Minister, accused by Higgins unfairly of treating her badly after the rape alleged. The ACT Director of Public Prosecutions forced to quit after inquiry found him guilty of serious misconduct in the case. Lisa Wilkinson, the Channel 10 journalist, taken off air a year and a half ago after, don't even go in it. I mean, seriously, there are too many people whose lives have been damaged by this case to name. But here now comes Taylor Auerbach. He's a former and disgruntled producer from Channel 7's Spotlight show. And if you believe him, everyone's rotten. I mean, Lehrmann is a lying, cocaine-sniffing fan of prostitutes. Channel 7 paid for its prostitutes. His lawyer ordered Auerbach to destroy documents. His former bosses are backstabbers, bullies, and even some of them anti-Semites and more, if the judge accepts his evidence. Now, Lehrmann is suing Lisa Wilkinson and Channel 10 for defamation for allegedly identifying him on air, suggesting he was guilty of rape. The judge said both Lehrmann and Higgins had lied in court and was about to hand down his findings today, actually. But up popped Auerbach a few days ago to say he had damning new evidence, and the case has just been reopened. And today he gave some of that evidence, and we're back tomorrow to finish it. And it's just was extraordinary. For instance, Auerbach says he took Bruce Lehrmann and Lehrmann's media minder back to his home after dinner. This is a couple of years ago. And he claimed elsewhere that he ordered prostitutes for them, $10,000 worth, would you believe, and paid for them with his Channel 7 credit card. And this was when 7 was trying to sweet-talk Lehrmann into giving an interview to them. Now, Lehrmann denies this happened. And here comes the first problem with Auerbach's evidence. The next morning, he actually sent Channel 7 an email offering to resign, saying, last night and early this morning in a drunken daze, I put thousand upon thousand of charges on the corporate credit card for something that had nothing to do with work. I'm disgusted with myself and apologise with every cell in my body. Nothing to do with work, he wrote. He doesn't deny also telling his clinical psychologist at the time the same thing, nothing to do with work, but says he was just maybe protecting 7 and Lehrmann in part by saying that. And you should see Auerbach, he gave his evidence very confidently, you would have thought. I mean, no shilly-shallying. He was asked, what did Channel 7 do when it heard it used the current company credit card on prostitutes? He said, and I quote, they offered me a promotion and a pay rise the very next week. A pay rise. Well, I will say that 7 have come out late this evening and says they are appalled by the allegations made in recent days. 7 did not offer a promotion or pay rise to Mr. Auerbach in November 2022, nor did it do so at any time after that. Seven did not reimburse Bruce Lehrmann for expenditure that's allegedly being used to pay for illegal drugs or prostitutes, and never done so, and the matter remains before the courts. Yet on the evidence today went. Auerbach said that the next month Lehrmann then sent him lots of documents that he got from police from his trial and shouldn't by law pass them on, said he hadn't. Like pages of Brittany Higgins' emails. Again, Lehrmann denies that he did this, denied it on oath in court. It was put to Auerbach that his psychologist's report did describe him consuming up to 30 drinks a day around this period, but Auerbach insisted that his evidence should not be doubted. Like I say, he gave it confidently. In January last year, big night, Lehrmann told Auerbach that he would do this spotlight interview with Channel 7. This is according to Auerbach. As long as Channel 7 didn't ask him about what actually happened on the night in camera with Higgins. Auerbach told the court that Mr. Lehrmann had over dinner purchased a bag of cocaine while we were dining at the Franca, and when we got upstairs to the room in the hotel, he pulled that out and started to put it on a plate and then started talking to me about a prospective spotlight story and his desire to order prostitutes to the Meriton that night, and began Googling a series of websites to try and make that happen. Now, Auerbach says he texted his boss at the time, at 7, Steve Jackson. I told him, Bruce was on the warpath again. This is effed. Now, Auerbach said Lehrmann actually had to pay for the prostitutes that night because Auerbach had no money on him, and Channel 7 later paid Lehrmann back with a per diem allowance. Auerbach says Lehrmann showed him the receipt. But again, Lehrmann denies all that. Channel 7, I just read you out what they said. They denied that all. Denies it. Denied paying for drugs and prostitutes. And where are the documents to prove it? Oh, well, said Auerbach. Channel 7's lawyer, Richard Keegan, who works for us here at Sky 2, told him to destroy any incriminating documents. Not quite in quite so many words, but Auerbach said he got the message and did just that. Now, Richard Keegan actually legals my stuff quite often. For all I know is legal what I'm telling you now. I don't know. I have heard huge trouble, to be honest, believing that Richard would do what Auerbach claims. I mean, but listen, this is for the judge to decide, okay? So, again, it was a day of wrecking ball evidence. It would destroy careers if true. We also heard that Auerbach hated Jackson, though. Hated Jackson for sidelining him from the show, the Spotlight show, the interview with Lehrmann, and making sure that Channel 7 then let him go. So it was quite cross. He said he actually filmed himself smashing Jackson's golf clubs. Said he hated them, but not at the time he was smashing the clubs. He hated him other times. And he also admitted he'd circulated photos of a topless woman to journalists without her consent. Says he didn't know that was illegal. But Auerbach denies he's just out trying to destroy everyone he thinks lets him down, is telling the truth, he says. If he is, what does this story tell us about the media? If he isn't, what does this tell us about him? After the break, the Albanese government exploits the death of an Australian aid worker to savage Israel, and it seems to please Muslim voters, threatening Labor's seats. Click, click, click. One of America's top generals calls out the world's double standards here. Another day, yet another disaster, and Labor's push to get rid of coal and use renewable energy instead. And this time it is a Queensland disaster. Now, we've already seen one pumped hydro scheme blow out already, right? We've seen that, the Snowy 2.01. They will use, if it ever gets built, wind and solar power to pump water uphill, so then that water can fall down when we actually need the power and make hydroelectricity. It's like a giant battery, right? But very expensive. In fact, Snowy 2.0 already looks like costing us 10 times more than the $2 billion that Prime Minister Malcolm Turnbull first said. But today, there's now warnings that Queensland's own pumped hydro scheme near Mackay, the Pioneer Burdekin project, will also blow out to a massive $18 billion. That's 50% more than originally promised. And that's likely to go much higher. It's not even being, work hasn't even started. And it's already the state's biggest infrastructure project ever. And that's not all. It's right where there's a big platypus population, 300 platypi. And the locals gave Premier Stephen Miles what for when he visited this week.
Pristine environment, no industrialisation.
The Premier also had to apologise for the locals being given little warning ahead of this project being sprung on them 18 months ago, given that it's going to drown 50 of their properties.
In hindsight, we could definitely handle that better.
And by the way, Queensland also has a second of these pumped hydro projects, the Barumba Dam one, and that's another $14 billion. This green energy revolution is going to bleed us dry. Joining me is Federal National's frontbencher, Barnaby Joyce, the former Deputy Prime Minister. Barnaby, this doesn't look good for taxpayers at all. For the price of those two pumped hydro schemes, you could build at least 2 giant nuclear power stations and be done.
Oh, no, that can't be right, Andrew, because Chris Bowen says that's not correct. I mean, the cult of the swindle factories relies on lies. I mean, we have this, this cultish attachment, the wind farms, swindle factories, solar factories, and now they always said it's so cheap, it's so incredibly cheap. Even this afternoon I was debating the Labor Party, it's incredibly cheap, except you have to pay through the nose. See, even when they build these swindle factories attached to pump hydro, that pump hydro, even so hydro 2.0, only goes for 4 days. It doesn't go 24/7, 365 days of the year, and then it runs out. And of course, when you've got the cost of the pump hydro and add it to the cost of the swindle factory, the so-called wind farm, and have the cost of the transmission lines, when they tell us 40% of the bills come from poles and wires. So what are they building? Tens of thousands of new kilometres of poles and wires. Well, then the price that you pay is through the nose. You just get ripped off. And of course you can't say it because in cults you can't argue with the religion. You cannot be a denier. You've got to be a believer. You can't deny the reality of your power bill. You just have to believe that it's A-OK.
Honestly, Barnaby, when they're trying to sell you a used car on the radio, even then they've got to have a little disclaimer on the ad, T's and C's apply. They never told us that T's and C's here are going to apply and they're going to cost you tens and tens of billions of dollars. It's unbelievable. Now, Barnaby, later in the show, I'm going to show the Prime Minister going feral again at Israel and its Prime Minister, not even ruling out suggestions of war crimes investigations into the tragic killing of an Australian aid worker, Zoe Frankham, in Gaza this week, in what Israel has said was an accident. It's going to investigate. What do you make of the way the government is handling this? Well,
look, it is a tragedy, and wars are horrid things. People should not start wars. It doesn't matter. You can have all the investigations you like. It's not going to bring this person's life back, and that's a tragedy for their family. And I never, ever want to belittle loss of life, but there is so much loss of life in this war. And it's what you're seeing is, of course, Israel is going to investigate it, and I hope they do a very competent and honest job. You're going to get nothing like that from Hamas because they're a terrorist organisation. They celebrate killing innocent people. And so, you've got to be... Mr Albanese jumping in and assuming all knowledge and sort of playing cards for a war on the other side of the planet, I think is fraught with danger. And all I want is the war to stop. And you've got other people a lot closer to the action, I suppose, well, closer, I hate to belittle, it's not action, this horrific event, being the Saudis, the Egyptians, United Arab Emirates. I just hope they all get their heads together and work out how to stop this. But it's not going to be stopped from Canberra, and it's not going to be stopped by Anthony Albanese.
Well, I just wonder whether some of the heat that Labor's putting on Israel, and not Hamas, might be governed by the fact that Labor insiders are already worried about a backlash by Muslims in Western Sydney seats held by Labor. They still think Labor's not tough enough on Israel. There's even talk of fundraising for Muslim candidates of parties. I wonder if that's going to explain anything. Yesterday, the Prime Minister appointed
If we affect the egalitarian nature of Australia, if the Prime Minister is playing into this partisanship, then that's an incredibly bad thing, an incredibly wrong thing for the Prime Minister to do. The egalitarian nature
I don't know that he is, Barnaby. I'm just saying.
You deal with things.
I'm just saying this is what Labor Party insiders are saying. I don't know if it's true. I hope it's not, but I'm afraid I wouldn't put it past some of the Labor types, to be honest, in New South Wales. Yesterday, the Prime Minister appointed a former Labor advisor and insider, Sam Mostyn, as our next Governor-General. I know you've got to say, pay the party, the loyalty game here. But Barnaby, she has made a career from pushing for women to get promoted. So woke that she's been chairman of Tim Flannery's Climate Council. Also backed The Voice. Went into mourning when 60% of Australians said no to The Voice. Here she is.
I, frankly, after the referendum, I felt completely untethered because I thought perhaps we were a big enough nation and there was enough understanding to actually make that step. I'm horrified to think about what I thought Australia was growing up with the Captain Cook story and no mention of First Peoples or of frontier wars or any of that hidden from us. So it's a catastrophe because I think that led to what we then saw at the most recent referendum in Australia.
But Joyce, are you happy with Sam Mostyn's appointment as Governor-General? Is this the unifying neutral figure that we need?
Well, she's wrong on The Voice. A choice of the Australian people, and you should respect it. An overwhelming choice of the Australian people because they didn't want a race-based clause that differentiated what say you had in politics based on your DNA. I don't know what part of that she doesn't understand. I said on this program with you, even I might say, Andrew, even when you doubted me, I said, this thing is going to absolutely nosedive. It is dead in the water.
You did?
That's exactly what happened. And the other thing I would say about this is she's got to be impartial. You go into this with a track record of what you've said before, and the Australian people will say, well, I understand that you were wrong on your position on The Voice, but then to wake up the next day and say, how horrific this all is and what a terrible thing this is for Australia. No, you respect, you're now at the pinnacle, the very top. You've got to respect the mandate of the Australian people because even though you might be at the pinnacle, they're actually the boss. The Australian people are actually the boss. And that's disturbing. And frontier wars, there were no frontier wars, right? There was no Australian army, there was no Australian general engaged or sent out to fight an Aboriginal army. There was not one person in an Australian uniform that ever fought against an army of Aboriginals. There wasn't an army. There wasn't when a person came. When Governor Phillip was Governor Phillip, he wasn't General Phillip or General or General Macquarie. They were governors. And when people say frontier wars, it's just implying something that just actually didn't happen. There was certainly murders, there were massacres. Yes,
I also think it's a bad look.
No frontier wars.
It's a bad look, isn't it, that someone who says that 60% of people aren't big enough, of Australians aren't big enough to actually vote for The Voice. She's going to be Governor-General of a nation of 60% small people? I mean, I don't know about that. Barnaby Joyce, thank you so much for your time.
We've always got to be impartial. She's an appointment of His Majesty the King of England.
Yes.
I'll leave it on on recommendation of Anthony Albanese. I'll leave it on both their shoulders.
Good on you. That is very generous of you. Now, I want to go back to the extraordinary day in court today in the Brittany Higgins case with Taylor Auerbach's evidence. Joining me is Adrian Anderson. He's a prominent barrister specialising in defamation law, which, I've got to say, he's fought the very good fight for me as well, as has one of the barristers in this case, by the way, Matt Collins. Adrian, thank you so much for joining me. Today's evidence, you've got a guy in there saying, trust me, all these people did these terrible things. He says, I saw it, but without hard evidence and with everyone else seeming to deny it, how does a judge work out in cases like this, if this is the truth, when the witness gives his evidence so confidently? I mean, can you trust demeanour, for instance?
Well, it's certainly one thing a judge will look at, Andrew, but the key thing is really to look for any corroborating evidence. that is anything that backs up the truth of what the witness is saying. And in this case, the allegation is that material that was part of the police brief concerning Brittany Higgins was provided by Lehrmann to Auerbach. Now, one of those sorts of corroborating information that they are relying on is that the date of creation of the brief, of the material that was in Auerbach's possession, is the same date that it was created by police. So that's the sort of information you look at to say, what else is there that backs up the truth or supports the truth of what's being alleged?
Now, as you look, so this guy's in court and his evidence is so damning for so many people. Channel 7, our lawyer, blah, blah, if accepted by the judge. Now, take all the noise and fury away, if what Taylor Auerbach is saying about Bruce Lehrmann is true, you know, he takes drugs and he used prostitutes, all of which he denies, and he gave, he leaked this this police information against the law, he leaked it to to journalists and whatever. If it's true, what does it mean for Bruce Lehrmann's defamation case against Channel 10 and Lisa Wilkinson?
Well, two main effects, Andrew. The first is it could have a very damaging effect on his credibility when he's given evidence in the case that he did not disclose information that he received as a result of the criminal proceedings. So it's probably important for your listeners to understand, in a legal case, if you receive documents that are not yet produced to the court, you're under a very strict obligation not to use those documents for anything other than the purpose of that proceeding. And that's called the Harmon undertaking. And it was put to Lehrmann in his evidence that he must have given some of these documents to Seven, and he denied that. And if he did, there's two things. One, it's evidence of lying. So they'll say, well, that's more damage to his credibility. You can't believe what he's saying. And secondly, it's a very serious contempt of court. And that also damages his credibility and the believability of everything else that he said, particularly on the central allegation of what happened on that night, i.e. did he or did he not rape Brittany Higgins? The second part to why it might be relevant is even if he wins is to damages, because no doubt 10 will be saying, and they are saying, that this sort of conduct means that even if he's right, he shouldn't receive substantial damages because he's behaved in such a terrible way and he's lied about something so important and he's in contempt of court. And they're also arguing that he's done this as sort of an abusive process that to try to influence this particular case and potentially impact the willingness of witnesses to come forward. So it has and that's, the judge to rule and allow this to come in late. It's not normal. You have to show exceptional circumstances, and you have to show that it's in the interest of justice and that it's the sort of stuff that could have a real impact on the case. And the judge accepted that.
Well, we shall see where this goes. Adrian Anderson, thank you so much indeed for your time. I should say, though, that the real political story, the political angle in this, is why the Albanese government gave Brittany Higgins $2.44 million in compensation after she complained the wicked Morrison coalition government treated her terribly after the rape. The Albanese government, fresh from its election victory, gave her this money, even though Higgins' bosses, chief of staff, they denied treating her badly, even though the rape still hasn't been proved. And they gave it after just one day of mediation when the ministers that were Higgins' bosses were refused to come in and contradict what she was saying. It's just amazing. The Herald Sun, a News Limited paper, has actually submitted an FOI request on the legal advice the government considered before handing over all that money, your money, to Higgins, and got only pages and pages of nothing, all redacted. We still do not know on what basis the Albanese government gave this young woman so much money over claims that have been so hotly denied. That needs a real inquiry, that one. Now, there were a thing that's really preoccupying the Prime Minister, certainly today. There were actually 2 Israeli missile strikes on Monday. One, in fact, was a brilliant but dangerous success that's got ignored because the other was a total disaster. And let me start with that one, the killing by Israel of Australian aid worker Somi Frankham in Gaza, which is now being exploited, in my view, by the government as an excuse to demand Israel stop fighting the Hamas terrorist group that attacked it on October 7. And also by activists wanting Israel tried for war crimes. We've already heard the Foreign Minister, Penny Wong, demanding an immediate ceasefire from Israel, even though Hamas is still holding more than 100 Jewish hostages. And today the Prime Minister was asked first by the ABC and then at a press conference again, what about getting Israel charged with war crimes here? What about a war crimes investigation? He wouldn't rule it out.
What I've said is that there needs to be full accountability and transparency for this tragic event. Somi Frankham should have been safe. I spoke with Prime Minister Netanyahu yesterday morning. I have demanded full accountability for what has occurred. They have committed to a full and proper investigation. I want that to be transparent and I want those findings to be made public. What we know is that there have been too many innocent lives lost in Gaza.
Albanese also took a shot at Israel's Prime Minister for saying not just that the killing was a mistake and he took responsibility and he would investigate it, but for adding that it was a product of war.
And what isn't good enough is the statements that have been made, including that this is just a product of war. This is against humanitarian law.
Israel's army did say this was a mistake. It didn't identify properly Frankham's aid convoy in the dark. We do need investigation, though, from Israel, but a war crimes investigation? Why have I not heard any of the people demanding that also demand that Hamas be dragged into war crimes hearings for what it did on October 7? Not accidentally, but deliberately slaughtering 1,200 Israelis, mostly civilians, even children, raping women, kidnapping. There's something else going on here. It's not just a cry for justice. But to the first missile attack on Monday and to our guest, because this could change the Middle East. Israel flattened a building on Monday next to Iran's consulate in Damascus, Syria's capital, northeast of the border with Israel, and killed a very senior Iranian general, Mohammad Reza Zahedi, of the Foreign Operations Arm of Iran's Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, and its most senior official in Syria. It also killed the general's deputy too, another general, and other officers. Joining me is General Jack Keane, a retired four-star general who served as Vice Chief of Staff of the United States Army. He's now chairman of the Institute for the Study of War. I actually spoke to him a short while ago. General Keane, thanks for joining me. This General Zahedi, how important was he, and what's the significance of his assassination?
Yeah, well, he was certainly as a key leader in the IRGC, the Iranian Republican Guard Corps, and the Revolutionary Corps, excuse me. He oversees Lebanon, Jordan, and Syria, so he's a major factor in what has taken place in the war in the Middle East right now. He has his hand in all of it, and certainly the Israelis were very much aware of that, and I'm certain they feel fortunate to have been able to figure out where he was and take down him, as well as his chief of staff and a couple of the other senior leaders associated with him. I'm a little frustrated with my own government for distancing themselves from that and making certain Iran knew we had nothing to do with it, when what we should be doing is championing what did take place in taking out such a key figure, has so much blood on his hands, not just of the Israelis and what is going on with the war in Gaza, but also United States troops through the years as well.
Yes, let's not forget that Iran is a major sponsor of Hamas and Hezbollah. Hamas to the south of Israel, Hezbollah to the north, and Hezbollah has been, during this conflict, actually firing many rockets virtually daily at Israel. So this guy's right involved in that war. Iran has promised revenge. What is likely to happen? Is this going to morph into an all-out war, Iran versus Israel?
Iran has options in terms of retaliation, but I think they are so conditioned to being attacked, they're not going to do anything, Andrew, that would lead to Israelis to really have to escalate against them that could possibly lead to a war. Iran knows any war with Israel and the United States, they don't just lose the war, they lose the regime. And that is why they have proxies to begin with. So they keep themselves at distance from the response to the proxies. They'll likely respond, but I don't believe it'll be an overwhelming response which would force the Israelis to significantly escalate.
I think their war on Israel through Hamas is going well enough for them as it is. Speaking of the disastrous attack by Israel on an aid convoy, they say they didn't know, they thought it was a Hamas target or whatever, on Monday that killed those aid workers, including an Australian. There's calls here to treat it as a war crime, investigate it as a war crime. How do you view what happened there?
Well, I think the Israelis should get some credit for, one, disclosing this as quickly as they understood the facts of the situation. They admitted that was a mistake. They apologized for that mistake, and they're conducting an investigation. Nothing like that happens with Hamas or Hezbollah or any of the other proxies in the region who go out of their way to intentionally kill civilians. The Israelis are making the point, and I agree with them, this was no intent to hurt any of these innocent civilians who are so courageous themselves in going out to try to feed people who are starving. Quite the contrary. There was a mistake made. In Kabul, when we were making our emergency retreat out of Afghanistan, and we had 13 soldiers killed and 170 Afghans due to a suicide bomber, we attacked what we thought was the origins of the suicide bomber, and we killed 10 people, all innocent people, 7 children were a part of that. That was a terrible mistake, and we did the same disclosure that the Israelis made. This is the horror of war. People in war who are human beings make mistakes, but contrast the difference. What Israel is doing here is admitting a mistake. They're saying there was no intent to kill innocent civilians. Hamas goes out of their way to kill innocent civilians. And just for the last 2 weeks, Andrew, Hamas has shielded 200 to 300 Hamas fighters under the Al-Shifa hospital. Using that hospital to shield them is a war crime. And that's the reality of it. And the Israelis killed 200 of them and captured some 500 others as a result of what Hamas is doing in the tunnel complexes below. And the best of my knowledge, the Israelis have told us there's not a single tunnel complex to protect the Gazan citizens from airstrikes or the war itself. Hundreds of miles of tunnels are for who? Hamas fighters. They want the civilians to be killed. And where is the consistent outcry of that tragedy and that war crime that Hamas is committing every single day?
Oh, no, General, you're completely wrong. The consistency is this. They're attacking Israel for taking on the Hamas fighters that were using that hospital as a base. So the consistency is always assume that Israel is the guilty one. They're being held to a much, much higher standard than Hamas. Hamas is being held to no standard whatsoever. General Keane, always great to talk to you. Thank you so much.
Great talking to you, Andrew, and your audience. Thank you.
After the break, incredible. One of the top judges of the New South Wales Premier's Literary Awards is a Muslim activist who has praised a child killer terrorist. The panel after this. Now, this tsunami of anti-Israel propaganda, some's actually supported by our bureaucracy. Here's an astonishing example. It's been called out by Liberal Senator Dave Sharma, who said the New South Wales government should dump academic Randa Abdel Fattah as a judge of the New South Wales Premier's Literary Awards. She's chairman of the panel that judges the Multicultural Awards for Writers, a $30,000 prize, but she's an anti-Israeli extremist. By the way, it's only a 3-person panel judging this award, and one of the other judges chosen by the State Library is former ABC host Sami Shah, born in Pakistan to a Muslim family, and his Twitter feed is also stacked with anti-Israel posts and reposts. But Randa Abdel Fattah, she takes this to a whole new level. For a start, she helped share the leaked details of 600 doxed Jewish creators, outed people who included writers who were on WhatsApp, saying in a now-deleted tweet, it was the duty of those who oppose racism, misogyny, homophobia and all forms of oppressive harm to ensure that every space Zionists enter is culturally unsafe for them. So what does that mean, make them feel culturally unsafe? You see, this Abdel Fattah, this judge of the New South Wales Premier's own Multicultural Literary Prize, posted on her Instagram feed, since deleted, a poster of Palestinian women who she and other pro-Palestinian groups said were unstoppable Palestinian women that have inspired them. One is Layla Khaled, who hijacked 2 passenger jets. Another is Dalal Mughrabi, one of 11 Islamist terrorists who in 1978 slaughtered 38 Israeli civilians, including 13 children, and also shot an American wildlife photographer they found on a beach on their way to attack Tel Aviv. Joining me is the panel, James McPherson and Liz Storer, both of the late debate here on Sky News at 10 p.m. James, how could such a person be a judge of the New South Wales Premier's Multicultural Award? She was chosen beforehand, but her animus to Israel was not a secret even then.
Yeah, beggars belief, doesn't it, Andrew? And knowing what we now know, what chance a Jewish author has of taking out the Premier's Literary Award? And do you think the Literary Award will be a culturally safe space for any Jewish authors? I mean, we expect these awards to be dominated by people from the left, but this takes it to a whole new level, as you said, when we've got one of 3 judges who is literally lionising terrorists, which I would suggest makes her rather ill-suited to be a judge for this award and actually completely discredits Premier Chris Minns' key event.
No, I've got to say, she's since the lead of that poster, maybe she's had second thoughts, I don't know. But Liz, the government says, well, look, the panel has met, it's decided, and that it's done and dusted, but should the panel be sacked, reformed and judge again, given that there are 2 anti-Israeli activists, one of them this particular person?
Well, as you've already pointed out, Andrew, it's highly unlikely, in fact, completely impossible, if anyone did just the smallest bit of due diligence, that those who elected the panel weren't already aware of these 2 individuals' anti-Israel underpinnings. So I think the likelihood of that happening is slim to none. Let's be honest with ourselves. Right now, we've still got Chewit Rosenberg, Elsa, who was also part of the doxing of those 600 Israeli creatives. She was one of the most prolific, shared all their details far and wide with a charming caption that said, "Make sure these effing Zionists have no effing peace." Well, she's still got her contract with our, get this, Human Rights Commission here in Australia. So she's working on the taxpayer dime for the very body in Australia, statutory body, that is supposed to be tasked with the job of ferreting out discrimination in our society. She's on their payroll, meaning the taxpayers' payroll, and putting together anti-racist products, Andrew, so that she can make sure that school children aren't racist. Or how about the hate preacher in Sydney that we learned 2 days ago, while he's taking a break from telling his congregation to please kill Jews, he's picking up everyone, ferreting them to his sermons, and guess what? It's a charity registered organisation. So nice tax break from the government. Has that been revoked? No, it hasn't.
I should say he didn't say go kill Jews. He quoted a sacred hadith saying, "Oh come, Muslims, oh come, there is a Jew behind this tree, come kill him." So he was quoting a sacred text.
Well,
so you may say there's Well, whatever.
I think that's very generous of you, Andrew. Very generous.
I am a generous guy. It should be acknowledged more often. James, this bit worries me. Our E-Safety Commissioner, Julie Inman-Grant, has ordered Twitter to take down a post by a Canadian activist who opposed the appointment of an Australian transgender activist, Teddy Cook, to a World Health Organization panel. Now, Cook identifies as a man after breast removal surgery, and Inman-Grant said this tweet about him, or her, or whatever, was intended to cause serious harm to Cook because it misgenders the complainant, calls him her, and also contains a statement that implicitly equates transgender identity with a psychiatric condition. And Twitter took down the post after him and Grant threatened to fine around $750,000, but now it says it's going to fight her in court to defend free speech. Who's right?
Well, thank God for Elon Musk, Andrew. Someone's willing to stand up for the free speech of Australians. Certainly the Albanese government doesn't seem inclined to do that. It's not the job of the government to police our speech or to protect people from hurty words. The subject of this particular tweet is on a UN expert panel providing guidance on the treatment of people with dysphoria, which I would argue is a fair subject for debate as to the suitability of this person. I'm wondering if the real upset here from the E-Commissioner is the fact that this individual was misgendered, or is the E-Commissioner upset that this individual has been exposed as being someone who perhaps is not so suitable to be providing expert advice for the treatment of children who have problems?
Liz, a quick response from you. I mean, should we be free to say that a him is a her?
Oh, of course we should be. And this individual, Billboard Chris, is also, of his own volition, suing the Australian government separately. We all need to keep an eye on this E-Safety Commissioner, Andrew, that absolutely nobody asked for. Sure. She's been renewed for another 5 years. And let's not forget who her true taskmasters are. She works very closely with the World Economic Forum. She's all over their website as a very valued contributor. And that is very concerning indeed.
Yes, she told the World Economic Forum that we needed limits on free speech. Liz Storer, James McPherson, thanks to you both. After the break, first Denmark, now politicians call for the same in Britain. So why isn't Australia releasing data showing where our criminals were born? There's been a development. Last week I told you how Denmark collects data on where its convicted criminals were born, and it publishes them. Generally not done here because it's too racist. In Denmark, the results look like this for the rate of convictions for violent crime. Red is for people from countries in the Middle East and North Africa, Muslim ones. From the top, it's Kuwait, Tunisia, Lebanon, Somalia, Jordan, Morocco, not far behind. The rate for people born in Denmark is in black, 2/3 down the list, and below the Danes are people mainly from other European countries. They're in the dark blue. Since I discussed that last week with Patrick Christie's, Conservative politicians in Britain said the same should be done there. Politicians here have not said that. And I suspect the British results would not be that different, given claims now in Britain that Muslim gangs are dominating a number of jails. Here's a former British government advisor, followed by a former prison governor.
Islamist gangs, if you want to put it like that, Muslim majority gangs, where evidence was given to me in my review, where Qurans were put on the bed of incoming inmates with the very clear indication, convert or get hurt.
In a sort of like an inner city jail, like in London or Birmingham, yes, that it would be prevalent, that it probably is the majority are Muslim gangs, and that's just natural.
They were being interviewed by Patrick Christie's on his GB News show, and Patrick joins me from London now. Patrick, thanks for your time. How big a problem is this?
Well, it's absolutely massive, and the problem is twofold. What we have is domestic, homegrown jihadi terrorism that is running rife within our prison system and within wider society. Convert or get hurt is something that you said there. Also, as well, they have a problem with prison guards and police forces, so both inside and outside of prison, being too afraid of being called racist to actually deal with what is going on both in prison cells and in mosques across the country. There is also a massive problem when it comes to believing people when they say they've been de-radicalised. We've been burnt by this before in the case of Usman Khan, a terrorist who actually was on release and then went on to kill 2 of his caseworkers in a terrorist attack. So that is a massive problem. But the other problem is just foreign-born criminals living in the UK that we prosecute but can't deport. And there was a rogues gallery that I published on my show last night, Andrew. One Albanian man who was, unfortunately, for your more sensitive viewers, a child rapist. We can't deport him, even though we have a returns agreement with Albania. We also can't deport members of a Pakistani grooming gang, despite us giving Pakistan more than £1 billion in foreign aid since 2019. What soft power do we really have there when you look at that? There's even the bizarre case of a Nigerian individual who is a convicted sex offender and drug dealer. We couldn't deport him because it might have affected his health. He developed schizophrenia whilst in the country. We did offer to pay for his medication and continue to pay for his medication when he went home. But human rights laws, sometimes adjudicated by a foreign court, may I add, the European Court of Human Rights, saying that we can't do that and we are too weak to overrule them, despite France doing that routinely.
Patrick, it's incredible. I thought we were bad. You're just as bad, if not worse. Let's remember all this is happening under a Conservative government, or a pretend one, Patrick. Maybe that's why the latest polls show it's heading for the mother of all defeats in the election, probably late this year. Look at the electoral map that looks like changing. Labor is in red. As you can see, it's gone now double the number of seats, according to the polls, more than 400. Conservatives in blue face a wipeout, losing nearly 60% of their seats to be left with 155. Scottish nationalists, very woke, also about to lose 60% of their seats. Explain how bad the Conservatives are, because I think that's a warning to our own Liberal parties around the country.
Yeah, we used to have a game show over here called Total Wipeout. I'm not sure if you had the same, but I think you can imagine what it is, and it looks a lot like our next general election. Andrew, we do have a problem here with the Conservative government. You're right, you've hit the nail on the head. They don't want to conserve anything, and that tends to be a problem. We've got record levels of net migration and illegal migration, but also cultural problems. You know, they talk a good game when it comes to being anti-woke, and yet I unearthed on my show just earlier this week that the taxpayer has been funding not millions, but billions of pounds for academic studies into things like the Europe that gay porn built, or decolonising literature from Spain. I mean, it's absolutely remarkable that they've been doing this. To put it into context, it's so bad for the Conservatives that they're about to be wiped out by a Labour government that is refusing to tell us what any of their real policies are, and the Liberal Democrats, the leader of whom might as well have gone missing. If this was old school America, his face would be on the side of milk cartons, because nobody has seen this guy for however long. So people are basically just voting for anything other than the Tories, yes.
We've been there, Patrick. Patrick Christie's, thank you so much for your time. And to take it from me, well, my book of the week is Joseph Roth. Now, he's one of the great journalists that no one's ever heard of. He was Jew from the edges of the old Austro-Hungarian Empire. He went to Berlin in the 1920s. Most of this book, What I Saw, is from the 20s, so Hitler's getting stronger. He was the biggest paid journalist, in fact, in Berlin. Jewish, can you believe? When Hitler took over in 1933, he had to flee to Paris. And he wrote a great essay, drank himself to death, but in 1933, warning, the Jews first, the Christians next. This essay, well, go to Robinson's Bookshop, as always, for my tips are on the left, and go. And the whiskey of the week is Chivas Regal, 12 years, only about $50. A bit watery, but great. That's it from me. And Sherry Markson is up next. Good night.